In order to save a village, Indiana Jones must recover a sacred stone from human-sacrificing cultists. Special guest Bruce Edwards joins us to chat about covers for book reports, Lao Che's insurance fraud, and this movie's most realistic character. Listen for Fortune and Glory, and to find out if Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time. My name is Alan Noah, and I've got two friends with me today. First, my co-host, James Brief.
Hello, everyone. This is James Brief, the co-host of the Test of Time podcast. Thanks for that great introduction, Al.
Anytime. And joining us back on the show is our friend Bruce Edwards. Bruce, welcome back.
Wow, thanks for having me. I don't have such a professional-sounding intro as James. I'm jealous.
Oh, well, I mean, you are a guest on the Test of Time. I mean, that's pretty special? Question mark?
Welcome to the Test of Time. I'm Bruce Edwards.
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to emote like a 1950s DJ. It's time for some Beach Boys. Take it away.
Although, shouldn't we do like 1935 because of the movie today?
Good point. Good point. Well, I'm really glad that you're here, Bruce. You were last here in 2018, so it's been a long time. You joined us to talk about Halloween, the 1978 Halloween, not to be confused with the 17 other movies that are also called Halloween, and Night of the Living Dead. I believe you requested to come back for something that was not a horror movie. We were gonna have you on to talk about The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Oh my God.
Right. The scheduling didn't work out and I felt terrible. It was bad timing all around.
Yes.
But I know that you love Indiana Jones, so I'm really excited that you're here.
More than my own mother.
Take that, Bruce's mom? I hope she's not listening. But whatever, it's fine. I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad that you're back. We were emailing back and forth about doing this episode, and you mentioned that not only do you love Indiana Jones, but that you read the Indiana Jones novels, or some of them. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I own more than I've read.
I brought them upstairs here, and I'm just going to put them on the table for us.
Flop.
Obviously, this is an audio format, and our listeners can't see. What is that? The nine. I own 9 of these books, but downstairs on the bookshelf, I have many, 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 many Star Wars books.
Yes.
And I've really only read a handful of them. I got to be honest.
You've read the Timothy Zahn trilogy.
Yes, and I think that might have been it.
Okay, that's really the only one you have to read.
Right. But these 9 Indiana Jones books, I've read all of them.
Oh.
I bought them and I read them. And I know that there's more than these 9. I believe they went up to 12. But what I remember is that the first 6 are written by an author named Rob McGregor. And those 6 are connected. They have like characters that show up in one and then come back in the next one. They're different, you know, each one tells its own contained story, but they have more of a through line. And then there was an author named Martin Calden who wrote the 7th and 8th, and a different guy who wrote the 9th, and then they kind of were going off the rails, I thought, and I didn't pick up the last 2.
That was
last
actually
3.
That was actually the first question I was going to ask you. Were these all written by the same person? Because you had series when we were kids like Choose Your Own Adventure, and those wildly varied in the quality. Some of them were written by really good authors like R.L. Stine, the guy who wound up writing all of the Goosebumps and Fear Street, all of those kind of books. Some were not so good.
He wrote a few Indiana Jones Choose Your Own Adventures, R.L. Stine.
Really?
He
And
did.
same thing with the Star Wars books. There were some authors that were very good and generally went with the authors, not necessarily the storyline, really. I mean, of course, the storyline had to be good, but it's funny because Indiana Jones is the perfect setting for a series of books because it's timeless. You don't have to worry about the elephant in the room of the fourth and fifth Indiana Jones films. You have an aging main star, so you have to incorporate that into the film. But with books, you don't have to do that.
Bruce, you said you'd read some of these. Do any of these titles here look familiar?
Oh, God, yes. Specifically, the Genesis Deluge. I wrote a book report when I was, 11 or 12, I guess.
Really?
Something like that. I spent a lot of time on the cover to the book report. Was that a thing in school? You made covers to book reports, or did I only do that?
We did that where you'd make like the book jacket, so you
Yeah.
kind of have to write the summary like a regular book jacket.
But no,
You
but
don't
I mean,
quite
I
say
like
what the ending is.
drew like a cover for it, like
Right.
movie
You
poster.
decorated something like that.
Yes.
I don't think I did, but I was not an artistic kid.
Anyway, my teacher loved it, the whole thing. It was a moment of pride.
Okay.
And I loved the book, and I remember the book. I must have read it 2 or 3 times when I was a kid. It's the one that I remember the most, although not heavy on the action.
I really don't remember specifics. All I know is that was the one about Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark, not the
And
Ark of the Covenant.
Not the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
As a person with the last name Noah, of course,
Very nice.
I like that. Yeah. But I mean, I like having them on the bookshelf, and I'm glad I was able to take them off of the bookshelf for
Covers
now.
are gorgeous. Look at these covers.
Yeah, I mean, like Sala's on that one, and I really do think that the first 6 were good. I think Indy was married at
What?
some point in these, and then his wife died, I think. These take place before the movies, if I'm remembering right.
I think they take place before, during, after. I don't think that they're necessarily. Seven Veils is the one I'm actually currently reading. This guy right here.
You're reading it now.
Yeah. It's not a legacy thing for me. It's an ongoing interest for sure.
It says, Indy's a prisoner of a tribe who can control his mind. Ooh, okay.
And this is way before Crystal Skull too, so I'm not up to that part yet. But she's a good foil for him.
But let's get into Temple of Doom, the movie that brought us here today. I also do just want to point out for our listeners who can't see you, Bruce, you are wearing a t-shirt that says Lao Che Air Freight, which is chef's kiss exquisite.
Come on.
Well done. Well done.
I love this shirt.
It is a good looking shirt. All right, but Temple of Doom is a prequel to the previous film, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Taking place in 1935, an archaeology deal gone bad leads Indiana Jones, his colleague Short Round, and singer Willie Scott to a small Indian village. After learning that an evil cult stole the village's children and their sacred stone, Indy and his friends head to Pankot Palace to investigate. There, they discover that the Thuggee cult is still active and performing human sacrifices. That's right. The cult has the stolen Shankara stones, and the village's kidnapped children, who are working as slaves. Indy, Short Round, and Willie are captured, but they are able to rescue the children and recover the lost stone. They return it to the village, and Indy learns that there's more to archaeology than fortune and glory.
Spoiler alert, guys. What's up?
Well, this is the beginning part where
Hey.
we do a plot synopsis.
I know,
so
I'm just kidding.
Okay. And normally I would ask you if this was a big hit, but I know that it was. This was a big deal at the box office, right?
Well, fortune and glory were certainly obtained at the box office.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Right there,
That
right
was
there.
slick.
That
Yes.
was...
Well, the film was very well received when it came out. It opened at number 1 on May 23rd, 1984. It opened up on Memorial Day weekend, so $25 million Friday through Sunday, but $33 million over the Memorial Day weekend, which is huge.
Well, 84 money, what is that, like $220 million now?
Yeah, I mean, it made a huge amount of money. And more important than just making money that first weekend, it made $25 million or $33 million, but it made $153 million domestically, $333 million worldwide. So it had a lot of staying power. And it was in the top 5 of 1984. We have reviewed 4 out of 5 of these films. We'll get to number 5. You can probably guess what the number 1 film of 1984 is, Al.
Is that Ghostbusters?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Coming in number 2 is Temple of Doom.
Okay.
And number 3, it is a movie both terrifying and adorable.
Gremlins.
That's correct. It's probably the only film that can be described as terrifying and adorable.
It's not terrifying.
It is scary. It is scary.
I mean, to a kid.
Yes, it is.
Or to a 41-year-old named Samantha Noah. My sister's still afraid of it.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. That's a story for another day.
Well, you know what? The stuff in the house can be kind of scary when the gremlins and the mom and the things and the happening. You know, that's scary-ish.
I guess.
I guess.
Number 5 earned an Academy Award nomination for an Asian actor. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're gonna get this one.
I don't know. Give me a little
It's
more.
one of your favorite films ever. It was a dynamite performance. 1984. You might say he was the best around for this role.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the Karate Kid.
Correct. 1984,
Marita.
number 4. And number 5 film of 1984. We have not reviewed this film, but one of the main characters is named Mahoney.
Police Academy.
That's right. It was the 5th highest
Wow.
grossing film.
Well, that would explain why there's 6 of them.
It beat Footloose, Star Trek 3, Romancing the Stones, Splash. We do have one of the top grossing films of 1984.
As a side note, if you want to put it on the list for the podcast, I don't think you've done it yet. Tango and Cash?
We have not.
For a number of reasons, but one of the interesting facts about Tango and Cash, it was the last movie to be released in the 80s. So not only is it the height of 80s action movies, it's also the actual last 80s movie.
80s movie,
yes.
too. Wow. That's
Anyway,
a great call.
sorry.
Great call.
I actually have you on our list. Tango and Cash with Bruce Edwards. Right here on my list.
Look at that.
So there you go. You have
There we go.
dibsies.
All right.
It's official.
Dibsies. But I was also going to say, for the success of this movie, also helped to usher in the current, still era of PG-13 movies. It created the PG-13 in conjunction with Gremlins, actually.
Yes.
That whole rating, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, they were masters of the universe at this point. They could do whatever they wanted, and they got the advisory board to actually make a new rating. And it was very much in part because of Temple of Doom.
Right. And people sometimes think that Temple of Doom is the first PG-13 movie, and it's not. But it was very much inspired by this movie. And really, to your point, just Steven Spielberg saying, hey, your rating system is broken. You need a new rating in between PG and R. And the MPAA heard that and was like, yeah, you're right. Which is crazy. I mean, I forget what the name of that documentary was that came out years ago about like how they handle the rating system.
Right.
They are arbitrary. It makes no logical sense. These guys are stuck in their ways. They do things the way they want to, and they don't change for anyone. And Spielberg is like, hey, you need to fix it. And they were like, okay, sir.
Well, but remember, this was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg together.
Sure.
Right? This was Mr. Jaws, Mr. Star Wars, Mr. Empire Strikes Back, Mr. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Mr. E.T., Mr. Return of the Jedi. There was no one, I think, in history, no two directors were that successful, director, producers, whatever you want to say, that often in
Right.
that small of a time. So they were quite literally like running Hollywood. They could have done whatever they wanted.
Right. This is very true.
You know, last week we talked about how with the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Steven Spielberg had always wanted to make a James Bond film. So in some ways he got his James Bond, the Serial Adventures film. But something that Spielberg has always talked about in his career is he has been obsessed with musicals. He always wanted to make a musical. You know, you mentioned no one had ever had success. You did not mention he had a couple of big flops. He had one
1941.
big flop.
Yes.
Yeah, with John Belushi. It was a musical, kind of a comedy musical. And then 30 years later, he knocks it out of the park with West Side Story, which earns him a Best Picture nomination and, 9 other Oscar noms. But this opening of this film is obviously Spielberg being like, all right, no one's financing a musical for me, certainly not after my World War II musical flop, but I'm going to open this film in a way that is completely different than what you're expecting. Because if you expected another boulder to fall right away, that's not happening.
I also think it importantly set up the entire tone of the movie. Like, everyone's like, oh, it's so dark. It is. It's a dark movie. We're going to get there probably, right? We're going to discuss
sure.
the heart ripping and the child enslavement and the this and the that. But that opening scene with the musical number that comes out of nowhere is very impressively done. And it's clearly a fantasy sequence because there's no way, like, physically that could fit inside a nightclub and all of this stuff. It is just very clearly establishing, don't take any of this very seriously. We're just having fun here.
See, it's really interesting that you say that, because I remember as a kid really having a hard time wrapping my head around the part where they go into the dragon's mouth, because the first part of the Anything Goes sequence is in a nightclub, and the people who are in the club restaurant can watch the ladies dance and everything. But then they go into this dragon's mouth and they do a whole tap dance number that no one who's in that restaurant could see. I think I said something similar in our Muppets Take Manhattan episode, where they're on stage and they're doing a Broadway musical, and then they kind of run into the church for the wedding scene, but it's like in a separate room and you can see all four walls, and clearly the audience in the theater cannot see what's happening. And as a kid, that just blew my mind. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it. And I do still think it is a little bit weird in Muppets Take Manhattan and Temple of Doom.
Oh, there's no question. It's weird, but that's kind of the point. It's like, I'm doing whatever the hell I want. Here's a musical number. It's ridiculous. She's singing in Chinese. Like, guys, just sit back. I got this. And then the whole movie sort of like happens to you.
And then something else that they throw at you right when the film starts is that this film takes place in 1935. Now, why is it 1935 and not 1936 like the last film, or rather 1937, 1938, since this film is being filmed a few years later? And the reason they did this is because they kind of want to get around the Marion thing. You know, we don't really have to explain now, where's Marion? Why isn't she in this film? Because you know what? This took place a year before he reunites with Marion in Nepal. That's basically what I've always thought, why they did it like this.
No, it's not. I was reading about this and I literally Googled, why is Temple of Doom a prequel? Because that very same question was bugging me. And George Lucas answered it. And he said it's because he didn't want the Nazis to be the villain again. He wanted to do something else other than Nazis, which I totally understand. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing, to not want the Nazis to be the villain. But I don't understand why that makes it a prequel. It 100% should be a sequel. Sorry, I'm telling George Lucas how things should be. What a very typical nerd thing to do. But yeah, this movie can take place in 1937, the year after Raiders, and it wouldn't have anything to do with Nazis because it starts in China and then goes to India. And yeah, the Nazis were gaining power and influence in 1937 in Europe. I don't understand that reasoning at all, but I Googled it, I clicked on many links, and that's George Lucas's reasoning. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense because I don't think it's true. I think maybe he even forgot why, if that's a more recent one, because everything you said out is 100% true. The Nazis were also in power in 1935. It's just a weird thing to not to say that that's what would write him out. Because maybe you want to have him in Europe, and then you have to make it 1925.
There was a war between China and Japan around, I think, 1936. So that could have been why. That could have been why he wanted to avoid it, and then he forgot and said, "Oh, I think it's because of the Nazis." He's just forgetting. Perhaps because Shanghai was such an important sort of opening scene. By the way, did you read the story conference that I sent as homework?
I skimmed it. It was like a 27-page PDF.
And it is 27 pages of brilliance. So what I'm talking about is there was a story conference between George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and what's his head?
Lawrence Kasdan.
Lawrence Kasdan, thank you. In 1978, where they were discussing the whole character, the story for the first movie, ostensibly for the first movie, but they had so many ideas. A lot of them ended up in the other movies, chief among them being this entire Shanghai sequence.
Right.
They were going to shove into the first movie as how he gets, like, I think, essentially the staff piece or whatever.
The headpiece of the staff of Ra.
Yes, would be how he gets it, basically. But yeah, so they just sort of transpose it into this. They came up with too much movie for a movie,
right?
Essentially. But if you could find it online, it's very easy to find. But that story conference is fascinating, and it redeemed George Lucas in my eyes, because up until I read it, I was like, well, Steven Spielberg is clearly the author and architect of the entire Indiana Jones. Everything I like about it has got to be from Steven Spielberg, who's such a genius. And then I read the story conference, and it is clearly George Lucas's everything. Like the character, the world, the reasoning behind everything came from him, really. And Spielberg kind of informed it and colored it, but it was really him. And then, as you could imagine, Lawrence Kasdan came in and really sort of improved on all of that. But it's fascinating.
Right. Well, Lawrence Kasdan really made it a story. Like, George Lucas came up with the character, and then Spielberg came up with the set pieces and like what the action things were going to be, and then Lawrence Kasdan turned that and made it into a actual screenplay for an actual movie.
Correct.
And Lawrence Kasdan did not write Temple of Doom. He felt it was too dark. He wasn't interested in it. He was working on The Big Chill, another movie that we did on the podcast. So this movie was written by Willard Hook. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name.
I don't either.
And Gloria Katz,
yes,
who George Lucas worked with on American Graffiti.
Yes.
The darker tone is sometimes attributed to the fact that George Lucas was going through a divorce and Steven Spielberg was going through a breakup. He met his future wife, Kate Capshaw, on set when they were making this movie, but they didn't get together right away. I think Spielberg got back together with the girlfriend that he broke up with, and then they got married and then divorced, and then I think he married Kate Capshaw in '89. So it was several years later. They knew each other from this, but it wasn't like they fell in love instantly and started dating.
Yes.
A bone I have to pick with Crystal Skull criticism is just very briefly, there's a part in the opening scene of that film where there's a nuclear explosion and Indiana Jones hides in a lead-lined fridge. It's kind of joked about as Nuke the Fridge. But my problem with the fandom is that the film franchise that it is a ridiculous physics do not count, and of all the 4 films, I would argue perhaps Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom is the most ridiculous, starting with the opening scene, which goes completely wrong. Indy, he thought it might go right, simple exchange, but if it didn't go wrong, he had that friend of his, the waiter, that's the backup. What he did not back up is calculating that jumping out of a 10-story building would happen to have 10 balconies for him to fall through. He also did not account that he'd be jumping with twice the weight with a second human. Mm-hmm. But, that's the film that this is. I have gripes with the 4th film, but it's not Nuke the Fridge for being ridiculous, because Indiana Jones is a ridiculous franchise when it comes to that stuff.
Amen. I completely agree. I have the exact same take. The kind of action that happens in Indiana Jones, this isn't the French Connection. This is Abbott and Costello meets James Bond, essentially. It's funny, it's action, they're silly by their very nature. You're like, that would actually never happen. The plane scene.
Right, just the next scene when they jump out of a plane without parachutes with a raft.
However, Mythbusters proved that could happen.
I thought they proved that it wouldn't work.
No, I think they proved that it did work. I believe. We got to look this up. We got to find out. However, several very ridiculous things happen in Temple of Doom, including, and most egregiously, during the very exciting roller cart sequence. Minecart, thank you. At the end, they completely jump the track, maybe 100-foot gap.
Right.
And they land perfectly on the other side and keep going.
Oh, yeah, Donkey Kong Country
I'm
style.
just saying, if you want to apply the physics argument, you don't start with the nuking of the fridge. You start with at least this movie.
I hear that, but I think that Temple of Doom really cranked that element up more than in Raiders. The falling from the plane in the raft is way more cartoonish than anything that happens in Raiders. That is next level. Honestly, when I was a kid, it bothered me in Temple of Doom. It annoyed me. And I think that is considered one of the weaker elements of Temple of Doom. So then in Crystal Skull, when they were like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take that kind of thing, which was already cranked up way too high, and we're going to crank it up even higher. It's like, why? Take the things that were the best of the Indiana Jones trilogy and use those, lean on those. Don't amplify the worst things and make them worse. So I think that is where the gripe comes from. Honestly, I have a lot of problems with the plane hijacking scene. Well, it's three main problems. One is that they fall out of a plane using an inflatable raft. That is ridiculous. Also, though, before that, when you see the red line traveling, you know, like the Indiana Jones staple.
Yeah, they're real far from Shanghai.
They go really far from Shanghai, and they stop to refuel. You see the red line go into one city, I forget which city it is, and then they stop and they keep going. Why? I understand why Lao Che wants to kill Indiana Jones. I get that part. But why would he go to this much trouble to do it in this exact way?
Okay, I have one word for you.
Yeah?
Insurance fraud.
That's two words. But good point.
But as an adult rewatching this movie, I'm like, oh, that's the only thing that makes sense. We has to argue like, oh, we lost fuel over Nepal or whatever, so that's why we had to cut bait and his buddies will walk back. But that's the only thing. He's a businessman. He knows what he's doing.
Also, my third problem with this whole plane sequence is that after they fall from the plane onto the mountain in the raft, then they fall from the mountain into a river. That looks like a much bigger fall than the first fall from the plane. You know, from the plane to the snow, yes, that is a very large fall, and probably they would instantly shatter their tailbones or whatever from the impact. But then when they go off of that cliff into the river, that's got to be like twice the altitude, 3 times the altitude, maybe? I don't know.
I agree with everything you're saying. However, these movies, this one in particular, are cartoons. It's just fun. Like, whoa, wouldn't that be fun? Oh, now I'm doing a toboggan ride. Oh, now I'm on a river. And then the joke of, hey, we're fine. And then he sees the waterfall. Like, that's the point. The point isn't like, hey, isn't this realistic? The point is, wouldn't this be fun if this was happening to you? This movie, I think, more than any of the other ones, captures that so well. Just it's a thrill ride, it's a theme park ride.
Yes,
that is a movie, and that's all it is, and that's all I want from it, and that is why I love it as much as I do.
Right. We head to this small village that's been decimated, and the crops are all gone. We learn that the children are gone, the stone is gone, and Indiana Jones, along with this total fish out of water, Willie Ford, Willie Scott. Harrison Ford. Sorry.
Yeah.
They head over to Pankot Palace, and the first scene in Pankot Palace. I mean, this is a scene that I remember being terrified of as a child. It's not a very good scene that is held up very well. Spielberg has kind of apologized for it. It's a kind of thing where, you know, I know what he was going for, but unfortunately, I think it made people think that this is what regular people in India would eat, because there weren't like cult members at this dinner who were like, this is my favorite soup and the best dessert is coming. And it's like, no, I don't think they're eating chilled monkey brains. But like, you know, there's someone in the 1980s who doesn't have an internet and is not necessarily going to run to the encyclopedia to learn about the cuisine of India, small villages specifically. You know, it's the kind of film that probably spread a few bad ideas.
All right, so this is where we talk about the racial insensitivities, colonialism, white savior, like everything you could do wrong with telling this kind of story. They just jump right in, almost as if they took a raft out of a plane. They just jumped right the hell in. They did all of it. My favorite movie critic, living movie critic.
Okay.
Walter Chaw. I don't know if you guys read his stuff. Film Freak Central, I believe .net. I don't think it's a .com. He also writes for Decider. Anyway, he has a very complicated, much like me, has a very complicated relationship to the movie, but for much different reasons. Because he was, I believe, he's a Chinese American. He grew up in a Chinese household, and when Short Round came out as a character, he kind of suffered because his friends always asked him to do the voice, and they had just done that with, I think, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink.
Yeah, I think that was around
Long
the same
Duck Dong,
time.
So it was this like sort of onslaught. And then Data the next year in Goonies, this onslaught of Asian American stereotypes that kind of made his life very difficult.
Sure.
And then when you're looking at the movie as an adult, you notice how, for instance, the English being the heroes at the end.
Yeah.
Like what if we did not learn in American schools, podcast listeners, the horrors of, English colonialism in India at all. So in 1984, we had no idea. They genuinely just looked like, oh, no, those guys look helpful. With a little bit of sensitivity, there were other ways of doing that, which I think, were completely ignored. I do like what Walter Chaw says about this movie, though. I'm just going to read it real quick.
Please.
He reviewed all the movies when they came out on Blu-ray.
Okay.
Temple of Doom is an unbelievably crass, unpleasant, horrific picture that trades at its currency the exact sensibilities it purported to import from 1930s Republic serials. Sledgehammer racist, gleefully misogynist, unapologetically crude, ignorant, vile in almost every respect. It's also machine-tooled in its efficiency as an action delivery system, and it uses its abominations as the means by which we're kept, for the duration, completely uncomfortable.
Wow.
Right.
That is brutal. And there are valid points. I mean, the way that the eating gross out stuff scene is constructed, Spielberg and Lucas were trying to cram in exposition in a way that wouldn't be boring. How do you do that? That is very, very difficult. We've talked about that on the podcast in countless episodes over the years. It's a hard thing to do. And the way that they did it was by showing eating icky food. So then you're getting the exposition, but you're also getting the gag at the same time. You can really see that. That is very crystal clear of what they were going for. Kind of like big picture, it's not a terrible idea, except for all of the racist shit and all of the stereotypes and everything that's baked in, which is definitely a problem. And Bruce, you said the words white savior. That is a valid point. You 100% can make that criticism about this movie. Many people have, with good cause. Also on the podcast, we've talked about many other white savior movies. And I think the thing that really gets me personally about the white savior movies we've talked about is when the white guy learns from the black person or the Native American or whoever that racism is bad, and then they kind of lecture the audience, wagging their finger about it. That really just makes me want to barf.
To that point, this movie doesn't do that. Indiana Jones learns jack shit by the end of it.
That's kind of my point, and that's a very weird kind of argument in its defense, and I realize that. I think really it's just kind of for my personal preferences, that particular variety of white savior movie is the most offensive to me. But look, I mean, the criticism about Temple of Doom, you can't argue it. It is definitely there.
My problem with these two scenes, I don't think there's any reason you need these British at the end. They fire a couple bullets, but he could have just gotten away from them otherwise. You just didn't really need them. And secondly, I think that you could have done the Indian scene, just didn't have to be fake. People are eating live snakes cut out of a pregnant snake. There's a delicacy in America called sweetbreads. If someone presented it as, the thyroid gland from a young calf, someone would be like, that's disgusting. You describe what a sausage is? I mean, it's totally disgusting. We ground up the lips and these parts. We took out the intestines, flushed them out with water, stuffed it all in there, and, there's a sausage. I mean, you could have done something gross without doing something weird here that would be wrong.
To quote another, I believe, 1984 movie, The Great Outdoors, lips and assholes. It's all lips and assholes. But this side point. But I think what you're describing would have actually been more racist, because then you're saying Indian food is disgusting. Like that's what I mean about like the almost like honesty of this movie. It's like they're trying to just give you sensations, and the fault on their end is that they're not considering the implications of the delivery of those things.
Right.
They're very clear. Like, I just want to gross you out, and it works. That scene is so memorable. People have been talking about it for 40 years now.
Yes.
I still say you can make a comedic thing about fish out of water. It could be anything that people that are not used to. You mean we're going to eat oxtail? You don't need the eyeballs. You don't need something that's just so comedically stupid. But I agree. It's also just not needed, this scene. You could have had the whole scene with this nice-looking prime minister and this lovely young prince, well-spoken, and totally get fooled by it later. It's just a piece of comedy that doesn't work. I think that's the worst part. I think they're really going for comedy. It's not funny, and yeah, it does have the unfortunate side effect of also being, somewhat racist.
And, speaking of things that are designed to gross you out and elicit a very strong reaction, this movie's other, probably most infamous moment is when Mola Ram, the cult leader, while doing a human sacrifice, reaches into a guy's chest and pulls out the heart. It's really freaky. It's designed to make everyone in the audience want to put their hands over their heart, cover their chest, just in case, not that someone in the movie theater is coming after them and going to grab their heart, but it's that terrifying and also silly and cartoony, but you understand that this is a cult, this is a religious thing, and after watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know that in this cinematic universe, religions are true, at least sometimes, and if someone believes in a certain deity or god or whatever, they might be able to do some powerful stuff. When you guys saw this as kids, did it terrify you? Were there nightmares in the Edwards and Brief households?
It more confused me.
Okay, why is that?
Because I was like, well, he doesn't have a heart. How is he still alive being lowered into the fire? And then, like over time, I was like, oh, I guess it's magic.
Absolutely terrifying. And I love the fact that you said the other terrifying part after the snake eating scene. This was not the scene I necessarily thought you were talking about. I thought you were going to talk about the scene with the booby trap and Willie and the bugs, which is absolutely terrifying in a more realistic way. I understand getting your heart ripped out is more disgusting and terrifying, but I don't really fear that. However, the answer is yes, I absolutely thought that was scary in 1984. But the bug scene, this is the scene where Kate Capshaw is by far the best because she's a refined musician, the Broadway actress kind of thing. There's no real payoff for that except in this scene because it's even more terrifying for her because she doesn't even want to touch a bug, and the poor woman has to reach in a vat of just the most disgusting things. I mean, what that poor character must have actually touched is absolutely terrifying.
This feels like an organic moment to mention my appreciation for Willie Scott.
Okay.
A much maligned character in the Indiana Jones mythos.
Okay.
The complaint that she screams throughout the entire movie. I posit that she is probably the most realistic character. We all like to think we would be Indiana Jones.
Right.
We would be Willie Scott. We would be screaming. We would be complaining. We'd be saying, I want to go back to the city. That would be us.
Fair.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but it's true. For 90% of the audience, that would be us. Yes, she's a little dramatic. She's a little ratcheting it up. It's just kind of her personality, but it's nothing that's completely out of the question. Plus, in ways, she's just as tough as Marion. She doesn't take any of Indiana Jones' shit. She's not oh, he has to be, he's a misogynist bastard in this movie. He treats her like garbage.
Right.
And granted, at the end, there's that whip scene with the thing and the kiss and all that. But
right.
I have a reappreciation for her now, actually looking at her as a person and as a character in this movie, not just this screaming sort of foil to Indiana Jones that's just there in the background. She actually has some agency, although, she does end up doing whatever Indiana Jones asks, including reaching into a bug-infested hole to save Indiana Jones, which, by the way, that entire sequence is brilliant.
It is, and that is a line that I quote out of context, obviously, somewhat regularly of, "We are going to die." I mean, that delivery is perfect. We were talking a little bit last week about how Harrison Ford is kind of an underrated comedic actor. Like, people
100%.
don't think of him that way, but he actually can be really goddamn funny. And also, just talking about the screams, which you're right, she does get maligned as people just say, "Oh, all Willie does is scream." And there is some truth to that. Also, though, just in general, screaming is hard, and there are plenty of actors and actresses who scream in movies and they're not that great at it. Kate Capshaw does one hell of a scream.
Great screamer.
I mean, it really is a grade A scream, and maybe that isn't the most amazing compliment for her as an actress. I mean, I really don't know her from many other things. I know we saw her in Space Camp. I can't really think of many other movies that she's been in, but she's a good screamer.
To her credit, once she got married to Steven Spielberg, I believe they had children of their own, but then they also adopted, like, I think they have 7 kids. I don't know how many of them are adopted, but I think she kind of devoted her life to that.
Right.
So, screaming in a different way.
She does act, though, here and there. She does pop up in things, so she's not completely retired.
Yeah, she's better than people give her credit for. Kate Capshaw, you're all right in my book.
Aw. I'm sure she's happy to hear that.
Yes.
She is a big listener of the show.
Yeah, obviously.
Obviously.
That's why we're doing this.
Let me ask you about the end of the film. There's this climactic showdown on this suspension rope drawbridge, and Indy realizing there really is no escape, and he really only has one option, which is to cut the bridge in half and hope for the best. Most of the bad guys fall off. I'm not quite sure, how does he beat Mularam at the end? Now, this is what I think happens.
Gumption, James.
The 3 stones, when brought together, sort of glow for whatever reason, and I guess they get hot.
Yeah.
And I guess they burned out of the bag. And did Mularam just get burned and go ow, and basically fall down?
Yes.
Is that basically what happened? Okay.
Yes. The thing that I think is inconsistent, the 3 stones, whenever they're together, they start glowing, except for a very long time, they have all been in Indiana Jones's satchel right together, and they're not glowing and they're not hot.
Well, they were chanting.
Yes, Indiana Jones does make some kind of chant.
And I think it was similar to the reason why he didn't get killed by the Ark at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Something about purity or something, because the Sankara stones didn't burn him, but it did burn the bad guy. Like, they're almost not sentient necessarily, but the power of them is a positive power, and clearly Molaram's a bad guy, so they were like, we'll burn you, but not him.
You do also see it glowing when Molaram has it. He throws it up, and then by the time Indy catches it, it has stopped glowing. Yes, that is about a fraction of a second, but in that time, it has cooled down enough, I guess.
That's fair. And, there had to be some reason why Harrison Ford could defeat the character played by Amrish Puri. Sorry if I mispronounced his name. I thought he played Mularam fantastic, but this guy is an imposing character. He's huge. And so in the same way that Indiana Jones couldn't beat that shaved head guy by the airplane, it took a propeller to beat that guy. I'm glad that there was some reason why he was able to beat Mularam. And so that was just my one question there.
Shaved head guy makes an appearance in Temple of Doom, doesn't he?
He does. He is the guy who Indy beats on the conveyor belt thing where his headscarf gets pulled under.
Oh no, poor guy.
It was supposed to be a recurring gag where in every Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones fights and kills that guy. He is in Last Crusade. I think they edited his scene way down. It's not the big drag down fight that it was in the first 2 movies, and I think he had passed away in real life before they filmed Crystal Skull, which is kind of an interesting running gag, although in line with the racist stuff, he was wearing brownface in this movie. So that part's not great, even though that is an exciting fight sequence.
And he's not the only one wearing brownface.
This is true. There are a few white actors wearing brownface.
Speaking of which, the guy who gets his heart ripped out on a rewatch kind of looks like Michael Richards.
I don't think it
There's a
is.
resemblance.
Although, speaking of random people being in this movie, I did not realize that it was Dan Aykroyd who escorts them on to Lao Che's air freight plane in the beginning. In my defense, he's on screen for 4 seconds and not really prominent. He's kind of in the background.
Nope.
You don't have a clear shot of his face, and he doesn't sound at all like Dan Aykroyd. He's putting on his fake British accent. But I did not know that.
Yeah.
I was 10 years old when I found that out.
The question is, why? What the hell did that bring to anybody? Was that a favor?
I think it was probably just a thing of hey, Steve, can I be in your new movie? Yeah, sure, Danny.
Yeah. The moral is he was in the top 2 highest grossing movies of 1984.
There you go. So good on Mr. Aykroyd.
To bring it back to my friend Walter Chaw, he of the complicated relationship with Temple of Doom and specifically Short Round, he wrote also about how he, as an adult, went back and watched it, and his wife helped him to realize he's actually the best character in the movie in that he's the purest character. He's the one that you're really rooting for. He's the hero. He saves Indiana Jones. Mm-hmm. He's constantly upbeat. He is this just positive force throughout the whole movie that sort of bounces you through. He's the heart of the movie, really.
Yeah. Yes.
And as a kid, it's kind of surprising when you think about it. Either you wanted to be Indiana Jones or you wanted to be Short Round. And there was no in between. I'd be Short Round. And I don't know if anybody else felt this way, but out of the Goonies, didn't we want to be Data?
I don't know.
Who's better than Data?
Absolutely. I mean, Data had gadgets.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think I wanted to be one of the guys who kissed the girl. Sorry.
Yeah, there's that.
But I hear what you're saying. And I mean, yeah, you're 100% right. He is the heart of the movie. He is the character that kids are going to cling to and cheer for. And in a movie where they might very well be terrified by the heart ripping out and the eating of the bugs and the touching of the bugs and all of these horrible things, they're going to like Short Round because he's awesome.
Right. And who didn't want to be in 1984, speaking for myself, Indiana Jones' sidekick?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Right. You can yell at him, you can cheat in cards with him and, get away with it. I mean, that's awesome.
I love also, while I was watching this, I mentioned him earlier, there's this waiter in the scene with Lao Che, and as he gets shot by Lao Che's accomplice, he falls in Indy's arms and he goes, "We've had so many adventures together, but this is where adventures and I go first to the greatest adventure, death." Short Round's not his first sidekick. This guy, these novels that I'm looking at in front of me, there could be a dozen novels with that waiter character. And obviously he's in these Trusted Companion. And I love that small little piece because today there's no way they would put that in and not have a Disney Plus series ready for the early adventures of that guy.
I would watch it.
Yeah, but I feel like they would put that in specifically today. Don't forget to subscribe. So that's almost an outdated thing, but I love that's there.
Can I go on my rant about how they were going to make an Indiana Jones TV show for Disney Plus, and now they're not going to, and how angry that makes me? And by the way, the argument that fans specifically of Indiana Jones have, there should not be any more Indiana Jones movies, blah, blah, blah. What a bunch of horseshit. All right, you guys, the entire purpose of this character, this world, this everything, is serialized adventures, okay? This is not Lawrence of Arabia, okay? This is not a one-and-done movie. This is not even a trilogy. This is not The Godfather. This is supposed to be a silly character that goes around and has cool adventures that you want to watch over and over and over and over again. There should have been 25 Indiana Jones movies already, not 5.
Right, like James Bond, you can replace them. You're finding Atlantis, you're finding the blank treasure in Antarctica, you're finding some Native American things, South America, Asia. It's endless possibilities. Perhaps it's a good thing there haven't been 25 films because, pretty much...
Hard disagree.
Well, who knows how it would have been, but I agree that it should not be. It's a series that not necessarily should be made more, but could be made more if done well.
I think the problem isn't that it only should have been 3. I think the problem was that they stopped for 20 years and then picked it up. I think had they kept going and there had been one every 2, 3, 4 years, I think that would have been a completely non-existent argument that no one would have made. But because of the very, very long gap, that was why it was like, well, this was a resting dog that maybe you should have let lie. It's different to say you shouldn't have continued it 20 years later than, oh, you shouldn't have continued it 2 or 3 years later.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I guess my problem is that they're saying like they just don't make anymore. It's perfect the way it is, and it's like that is sort of dishonest to the very fabric of why they exist and why the people who are saying that like these movies in the first place. You go to these movies to live vicariously, to have fun temple raiding adventures and get in and out, and that's it. Why not have 1,000 of them?
But to your point that the thing that you like is the serial nature of them, the thing about the serials from the 30s and 40s and whatever was that you got a new one every week.
Correct.
So if you're going to let it lie dormant for 20 years, then you are going to hear the argument of why now?
Well, I mean, James Bond went dormant for a long time. Sometimes you get, the Timothy Dalton ones after a break.
Never that
sometimes,
long.
You're right, it wasn't that long. But sometimes, after dormant years, you get a sequel to Blade Runner, which is great. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Same thing if they ever make an Indiana Jones film or series. Bottom line, is it good or not?
Yes.
I can almost promise you, if they make a really well done film, it's not going to be, because we're just so loyal to only Harrison Ford. We refuse to watch these Chris Pine ones.
That's the part that confuses the hell. And by the way, if Chris Pratt had become Indiana Jones, that would have been proof of all proofs that we live in the worst timeline.
I did say Chris Pine.
I know. Yeah. I'm just saying there was a Chris Pratt talking about Indiana Jones.
Yes.
He could not hold a lighter to Harrison Ford. And by the way, Steven Spielberg, I only recently realized the reason that I love his movie so much is because who does entertainment better? Just pure entertaining. Like that's why Jaws is so great. It's not because it's scary, and it is scary. It's not because it's funny, and it is funny. Not because it's a good adventure, and it is a good adventure. It's because it's all of those things. It is constantly entertaining. Every scene. Just like Temple of Doom, but for a completely different reason.
Well, Bruce,
Yes.
I am going to ask you, as our very special guest, do you think Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom stands the test of time?
So it's a complicated answer. I feel it does not stand the test of time culturally.
Okay.
In fact, it's awful from that perspective. Much like anything from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s has aged awfully. Just like the lack of consideration and the, out and out misogyny and racism, etc. However, as a movie, this is one of the most entertaining movies ever made. Period. If you're able to overcome all of that stuff, I feel like I'm I don't want to say immune to it, but definitely inured to it because I've grown up with it. It's like part of the fabric of my personality. I can't separate myself from it, though I've always loved it and I always will love it, kind of. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask, but if you even just look at it as just craftsmanship level, it is, as Walter Shaw said, just a machine. And it does its job better than most movies of this kind. I would say yes, it stands the test of time.
All right, that's one for yes. Alan, what do you think? Does it stand the test of time?
I mean, I largely agree with what you're saying, Bruce. This movie does have flaws. There are things that annoy me about it, looking at it from a modern lens. There are things that bothered me about it when I watched it as a kid. Like I was saying about, where they go in the opening dance montage and like how they survived from falling on the raft. I thought that was BS as a kid. However, this movie is just really entertaining. It is like the minecart scene. This movie is a roller coaster ride. And it's really, really fun. It's just a fun movie to watch. I enjoyed the ride. And I understand why some people don't, and I understand why it's a little too dark for some people. I get that. All of the criticisms about this movie that I've read, that I've heard, I think are valid. But I really, really enjoy it. this is a very silly thing, but because of this movie, I thought Lazy Susans were the coolest thing in the world.
Oh yeah, me too.
Right? Like, you just in that opening scene, I was like, every table should have one of those. Those are so cool. I think the fact that it's a prequel is really, really dumb. I don't think it makes any sense. I honestly sort of think that, like, maybe it was a mistake, that maybe Lucas forgot and he meant to write 1937, and then he just had to come up with the whole thing about the Nazis as a retcon. I don't know. It also doesn't make sense that it's a prequel because it makes the gag less funny when he goes to, like, pull out the gun and shoot the swordsman. It's way less funny if this happens first. I was going to
ask this question.
Yeah.
Is it less funny or more funny? Because it makes less sense, but does that mean that he learned from it for Raiders of the Lost Ark? Like, I gotta keep this thing loaded.
The joke works funnier the way it worked for us, the audience, where we know that it works and then it doesn't. If it doesn't work and then you learn a lesson, yeah, that's a thing that happens in life and in reality all the time. But comedically, no, it works funnier if it works and then it doesn't. Right. So that gag doesn't land. Also, the whole arc, sorry, pun intended, of Raiders of the Lost Ark is that Indiana Jones learns that supernatural things are real and that, you know, the Ark isn't just a ghost story. Its power is real. And if he experienced all of this stuff in Temple of Doom first, he would know that there are supernatural things that exist in the world. I do hate that it's a prequel. That just gets under my skin.
It doesn't make any sense at all. However, you could say that he learned that this particular brand of Kali-based dark Indian magic was real. And then he was like, whoa, Christian magic is real too? Wow.
I mean, I guess. But overall, I do love
I guess would that be Jewish?
It's Jewish.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to correct you, but yes, it would be Jewish. But overall, I do enjoy Temple of Doom, and I think it does stand the test of time. James, what do you think?
I think it stands the test of time. I think, for the reasons that I'm strongly in favor of, I think Indiana Jones, mostly from this film, it's not realistic. It's like Star Wars to Star Trek. Whenever anything happens in Star Trek, Data or Geordi or whoever the engineer will be like, because there was something in the warp core which put the neutrinos. In Star Wars, they're not going to try to explain it. Lightspeed just means, shut up. Like, that's what it means. That's what these films are. Something I always thought about this one was that it was very enclosed. Like, it was just this small little, like, human sacrifice cult affecting this village. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm glad he stumbled into it, but, it's not like the Nazis were going to take over the world. But there's a great line that Mulram says. I'd never heard it before, but he says, first we will destroy the British, then the Muslim God, then the Hebrew God, and then finally the Christian God, which is interesting because they're all the same God. I thought that was interesting. I never really knew that that this cult was trying to take over the world. So I thought that was cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The parts that were insensitive. I think overall it's just a great adventure. It's not as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I have not seen Last Crusade in many years, but I always remember this not being as good as Last Crusade. And this was the film that I always remembered being on all the time on HBO. So this is the one I saw so much. And like this was the one I had the VHS tape of in the late 80s, not Raiders. So we just watched this one a lot. And to this day, whenever I kind of like outsmart someone a little bit, like with a little prank, the equivalent of like, hey James, sit down, and I see there's a whoopee cushion there, I'll basically get out of the way and go, nice try, Lao Che. Like, I love that line, and it's a flawed film. It's not his best. It's not Indy's best, but it stands the test of time. It's still a great adventure. Very scary, though. I do think it's. I was very scared as a kid, but that's 3 for 3, Al. We think this film stands the test of time. Very, very good. And in order for Mola Ram to take down all of the other major world religions, he needs all 5 of the Shankar stones. Right. That's what the kids are enslaved. They're looking for the other 2 because they have 3. 1 they got from the village. I think maybe he mentions where he found some of the others. But
I was thinking a great ending for this movie would have been if they get back to the village and they have all the kids and there's life in the village again, and he hands the shaman the rock, and the shaman goes, "Oh, this is an R." Yeah. Ours had a scratch on the bottom. Can you get that one? We really became attached to like our specific one.
That is a great point.
But Bruce, thank you so much for coming and joining us, and please stop stealing my Indiana Jones novels. You're very clearly shoving them under your shirt.
My shirt. This is how my chest looks.
You can borrow them. That's fine. You're more than welcome to them.
Thanks for having me.
Come back again, Bruce. Tango and Cash, that's all yours.
Wait. The Russian Maniac directed action movie with Kurt Russell and Sylvester Stallone talking about dick sizes with their guns. I can't wait.
I don't think I've ever seen it. None of that sounds familiar.
Oh, I've seen it, and it is such an action 80s film.
Why is yours bigger than mine? Genetics. Come on. That's the 80s in a nutshell.
Nutshell. You're welcome to come back anytime for any movie.
Okay.
Tango and Cash sounds great. Thank you again for joining us, Bruce.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Next week, everyone, we are going to conclude our trilogy of episodes about Indiana Jones when we talk about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade with our friends Matt Kroll and Shahir Dowd from the only podcast about movies. That's going to be a really fun episode. I'm really looking forward to that. Until then, we want to hear from you guys. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at testoftimepodcast@gmail.com. Share your indie stories with us. Were you petrified of Temple of Doom when you were a kid? Did it freak you out? Did you have nightmares? Were you afraid of bugs? Did you hold your hand over your chest? Did you love short round? Did you hate short round? Tell us. We want to know. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.